So, let's talk about Fear Street 1666. The final installment of this amazingly fun trilogy dropped last week, rounding out the story in the most satisfying way. Part 3, 1666, had the difficult task of not only being the end of the trilogy, but also its beginning, here to finally show us the backstory of Shadyside and the origins of Seraphia's curse, while tying the entire trilogy together in a cohesive manner. And I am happy to say that it does not disappoint, offering up a haunting supernatural period drama which answers all of our questions, offers some fun surprises, and brings the trilogy full circle. More than in my previous essays on Fear Street, major spoilers will be discussed here. If 1994 could be seen as a tribute to Scream, and 1978 an ode to Friday the 13th, then 1666 evokes The Crucible, the horror period drama from 1996, with its muted tones, softer camera focus, and tale of fear and bigotry in a small settlement. Unlike the previous two films, the gore in this film is toned down in favour of an atmospheric, slow burn drama. And while the result is maybe not as slasherific as the first two installments, it is just as intriguing and exciting. The use of actors from the previous two films filling the roles of our townspeople is not only yet another nod to 90s movies and TV shows, in which this casting gag was quite popular, but it helps to demonstrate how we as humans go around in circles, displaying the same mistakes and bigotries over and over. It also hints at past lives within the narrative of the story, as the characters we encounter in 1666 are very much like their modern-day counterparts. The Berman sisters are still polar opposites. Simon is still goofy and go with the flow, Kate procures hallucinogenic berries, and, most significantly, Dina and Sam are still fighting for their love, this time as Seraphia and Hannah Miller. The story emphasizes the similarities between the characters by putting a modern feeling on their characterization in 1666, showing the younger cast as teenagers partying and sneaking away from the adults, living carefree and large and indulging in illicit substances and broken curfews. Unlike the previous two films, which were set in modern decades and therefore had a plethora of pop culture references to draw from, 1666 didn't have a close enough reality to evoke the time period itself, so it opts instead to emulate movies set in the period, such as the aforementioned Crucible, and more recent horror films such as The Witch and Gretel and Hansel. The horror comes not from gore and violence, but from the curse on the settlement of Union, as the villagers watch their crops wither, their animals die, and, in one of the film's most horrific yet effective scenes, their pastor brutally cuts the eyes out of 12 of the village children before turning the same brutality on himself. The townspeople can only watch in horror and grief as the curse descends on their settlement, and, in their fear and ignorance, they turn on two innocent girls whose romance and attraction to one another is an abomination in the town's puritanical eyes. In my video centered on 1994, I speculated that Dina and Sam's relationship would be central to the entire plot, and mused about the significance of naming Nick Good, as the Goods were a prominent family in the original Fear Street sagas. Even though I ended up being kind of right on both accounts, even I couldn't have imagined the deliciously wicked twist that 1666 puts on both. As the film makes it clearer and clearer that Hannah, and particularly Sarah, are innocent, the question soon becomes, who exactly did curse Shadyside? How did the legend of Seraphia, the terrifying and vengeful witch, come to be? The film starts to give us an answer, as Sarah declares that she will become a witch if the townsfolk want to see her as such, and sets out to make a deal with the devil, only to discover that Solomon Good, ancestor of Sheriff Nick Good, has gotten there first. This reveal is shocking and works brilliantly on so many levels. First, for fans of the books, this is a fun spin on the feud between the Fears and the Goods, as the Fears were always the more diabolical of the families, and the entire feud started when the Fears had two good women wrongfully accused of witchcraft and hanged, elements of which seem to have inspired the plot of this movie in a wonderful tie-in to the source material. Solomon Good passing his curse down through the generations is a great spin on the deal with the devil, and ties in well to 1994, with Nick Good's somewhat shady sheriff always lurking about, and particularly to 1978, as Ziggy and Nick's tween romance becomes steeped in tragedy with the realization that Nick's family is responsible for Cindy's death, and very nearly Ziggy's too. Seeing Ziggy's heartbreak in 1994 as she learns that the person she still cares for betrayed her so deeply is hauntingly tragic, and adds another layer of trauma to her characterization. And speaking of tragic, this reveal turns the entire mythology surrounding Seraphia on its head, as we learn that, far from being an evil witch with murderous henchmen, Seraphia was in fact the original Shadysider, an underprivileged woman sacrificed for what would eventually become Sunnyvale, the town that prospers and benefits from the suffering and deaths of the Shadysiders. The supposed curse that she casts is, in truth, a curse on the goods, the promise that she will expose the truth however long it takes. As we see Sarah sacrifice herself for her lover, we get echoes of Sam sacrificing herself for Dina in part 1, and we see how the entire trilogy comes full circle, with the reincarnations of Sarah and Hannah finally ending the evil in 1994. Because, of course, we must have a final showdown, a face-off against Sheriff Nick Good, and a final end to the nightmare that has plagued the Shadysiders for generations. And so, we are catapulted back to the neons of the 90s for the final battle, where the surviving teens face off against the ultimate evil, with a little help from some friends. The Home Alone-esque traps they rig for the killers are amazingly fun, and Dina's final showdown with Nick Good in the underground caverns we first saw in 1978 is full of tension and intensity, coming to a wonderfully satisfying end as Seraphia awakens inside of Dina and helps her to take out the goods once and for all. There is a mild implication that Seraphia has been trying to break the goods curse for generations, but that she needed these particular people, reincarnations of herself and her friends, and particularly the reincarnation of her lover Hannah, in order to finally do so. And when the final shot of the movie shows Dina and Sam embracing in broad daylight, fulfilling a promise Sarah made to Hannah in 1666, we feel a sense of peace and justice. I theorized that the two girls and their romance would be at the center of the entire trilogy, and while I wasn't 100% right in my speculation, there's no denying that this relationship, which started all the way back in 1666 and came back to life in 1994, is the backbone of this story, and that is such a wonderful subversion for a horror film, for the LGBTQ characters to not only survive, but thrive. Fear Street Part 3 might not be a perfect movie, but it is the perfect ending, or rather, beginning for this trilogy. Carving out its own identity while still fitting in with the trilogy's overall tone and story, 1666 provides all the answers we have been craving in the most satisfying manner, providing many shoutouts, callbacks, and references to the previous two films, which eagle-eyed fans can pick up on upon rewatches. The entire trilogy is a fun and exciting thrill ride, jam-packed with scares, gore, and many loving homages and references to horror films gone by. Lifting story inspiration right from the pages of the original series, this trilogy is a wonderful reminder of how good the slasher subgenre can be. And I wouldn't be at all surprised if this is not the last we see of Shadyside and all the horrors that it holds.